Hello, and welcome to a peaceful journey into the realm of dreams. Tonight, I will guide you through a gentle, soothing tale to help you drift off into a deep and restful sleep. Make yourself comfortable now. Nestle into your soft pillows. Feel the warmth of your blankets around you, and allow your eyes to grow heavy. Take a slow, deep breath in, then breathe out any tension or worry from the day. With each exhale, feel yourself sinking deeper into the embrace of your bed, safe and relaxed. In this bedtime story, we will travel far away to a time and place of ancient myth and starlight. Our story is called Ariadne's Thread, a tender retelling of an old Greek myth about love, loss, and a single shining thread that guided a hero through darkness. Let the quiet voice of this tale surround you like a gentle lullaby. As you listen, imagine the scenes unfolding softly in your mind. Picture the moonlit shores of a distant island, the whisper of the sea against sand, and a labyrinth of secrets hidden beneath a great palace. Feel the calm of the night as we begin. The world outside grows still, and all that matters now is this moment of rest. Allow the lilting cadence of the words to carry you away, like a boat drifting on calm waters under a starry sky. There is no need to do anything but listen and breathe. Let your breath become slow and steady, matching the timeless rhythm of the ocean waves that gently lap the shores in our story. Now together, we step into the moonlit world of Ariadne and Theseus, a world of ancient islands and quiet temples, of silvery olive groves and soft, starry heavens. A story that begins in the hushed corridors of a Cretan palace at twilight and leads us through a labyrinth and across the wide, whispering sea. It is a story of a princess with a kind and courageous heart, of a brave young hero, and of the slender thread that connects them through darkness and light. Allow your mind to float along with the imagery, and if you find yourself drifting into dreams at any point, that's perfectly all right. This gentle tale will continue to flow, guiding you toward peaceful slumber. So settle in, snuggle down, and let us begin Ariadne's Thread. In the ancient land of Crete, beneath a tranquil midsummer night sky, a young princess named Ariadne stood alone on a marble balcony of her father's palace. The air was warm and still, carrying the faint scent of the sea up from the distant shore. Overhead, a crescent moon cast a gentle glow upon the palace of Naxos, and the countless stars of the summer sky shimmered like tiny pearls on black velvet. Ariadne leaned against a cool stone column, barefoot and clad in a flowing gown of soft white linen embroidered with patterns of swirling gold thread. She often found solace in the hush of the night, when the daytime bustle of the palace gave way to silence, and she could hear her own heart and thoughts with clarity. This night, however, Ariadne's heart was heavy with worry and sorrow. Far below her balcony, at the edge of the palace grounds, lay the entrance to a vast labyrinth, a twisting maze of corridors and chambers sunk deep into the earth. Its hidden paths had been crafted by the ingenious inventor Daedalus years ago at her father King Minos's command. By day, the labyrinth was a place of dreadful whispers among the court, a place no one dared approach. By night, it was sealed behind heavy doors of bronze, silent and lightless, save perhaps for the faint stirrings of the creature that dwelled at its core. For within that warren of stone lived the Minotaur, a being half man and half bull, a monstrous child of Queen Pasiphae, brought into existence by a cruel twist of fate. The beast was a symbol of both shame and terror in Crete, and to contain it, the labyrinth had been built like an inescapable prison of endless turns. Ariadne had grown up with the knowledge of this monster beneath her home. From her earliest years, she had heard muffled roars echoing up from the ground on quiet nights, and felt the tremors of the beast's fury vibrate through the stone floors of the palace. She knew the labyrinth's layout by memory from the drawings Daedalus once shared with her father, a single winding path coiling inward like a serpent's coils, complex and deceiving. As a child, she had sometimes imagined that the walls themselves were alive, shifting to confuse anyone who entered. In her mind, the labyrinth had become a symbol of hopelessness, a dark puzzle with no solution. Yet the Minotaur was not the only source of Ariadne's sorrow tonight. For years now, as punishment for a past conflict, her father Minos demanded a terrible tribute from the distant city of Athens. Every few years, at the turn of the season, 7 young men and 7 young women were sent by ship to Crete. These youths, in the flower of their lives, were offered as sacrifices to the Minotaur in that dreadful labyrinth, a payment in blood meant to appease the king's wrath and the memory of his fallen son. Ariadne had witnessed this grim ritual more than once. Each time, the Athenians, scared and forlorn, were brought before King Minos in the throne room under the bright Cretan sun, and each time her heart ached unbearably at the sight. She, who had a gentle soul, could hardly bear to watch the innocent youths destined to be led into darkness as prey for the monster below. Her father had put Ariadne herself nominally in charge of overseeing the labyrinth, a duty she never wished to hold. She was to ensure the prisoners were secured and the offering carried out, perhaps because Minos trusted that his daughter's presence would placate the gods, or perhaps simply because he wished to distance himself from the distasteful task. Thus, Ariadne often found herself standing by the great bronze door with a torch in hand on those somber days, watching as sobbing young men and women were ushered into the maze, knowing she could do nothing to save them. She would listen as their footsteps and cries faded into the depths until the labyrinth claimed them entirely and an eerie silence fell once more. Those memories haunted her. The looks of despair on those faces lingered behind her eyelids at night. in those moments, Ariadne felt as though she, too, were trapped in a kind of labyrinth, a maze of fate and family duty from which she could see no escape. But today, something was different. Earlier that very day, a new group of 14 tributes had been presented before King Minos. Ariadne had stood quietly beside the throne, her head bowed, as the herald announced the names of the youths from Athens and the reason for their doom. She had forced herself to maintain a mask of regal composure, yet inside her chest, her heart raced with pity and anger at this cruel cycle. As her gaze drifted over the frightened youths lined up in the throne room, she suddenly noticed one among them who looked strikingly calm and resolute, unlike the others who trembled or wept. He was a tall young man with broad shoulders and a bearing that seemed almost noble, despite his simple, sacrificial robes. His dark hair curled slightly over his brow, and when he lifted his face to meet King Minos' stern gaze, Ariadne saw a pair of clear, determined eyes that shone with quiet defiance. Something about this young man drew her attention like a magnet. A gentle breath caught in her throat. She realized her hands had begun to tremble slightly, and she clasped them together to hide the tremor. Who was he, this youth who did not cower before her father's throne, even as Minos harshly declared the fate that awaited the tributes? This young man held his head high. When one of the guards roughly motioned him to bow, the youth obeyed, but Ariadne sensed it was out of courtesy rather than fear. In that moment, a spark of hope, rare and fragile, lit within Ariadne's heart. Could it be that this brave soul believed he might survive what was to come? After the formalities, as was custom, the tributes were taken away to be kept under guard until the morrow, when at first light they would be sent into the labyrinth. The court dispersed, and Minos had swept out of the hall with a regal flourish of his robes, leaving Ariadne standing there, lost in thought. She lingered in the emptying throne room, watching the Athenian youths being led down the corridors toward the dungeons for the night. The young man with the proud stance walked among them, his hands bound loosely with rope. As he passed by Ariadne's place at the side of the hall, he turned his face, and their eyes met fleetingly. Ariadne felt her cheeks warm as an unfamiliar sensation blossomed within her. It was as if in that single exchange of glances she could sense the courage and resolve emanating from him, and something else, a gentle acknowledgement of her presence, a silent plea or question perhaps, shining in his eyes of deep blue. That brief moment felt stretched in time. Ariadne's heart fluttered. She wanted to speak out, to say something, anything, to comfort him, or to protest the injustice that would send him to his death. But no words came. She could only offer a faint, sympathetic smile, her lips curving ever so slightly, while her eyes grew moist with unshed tears. The young man gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if to thank her for that tiny gesture of kindness in a hostile place. Then he was gone, escorted through the archway by armed guards, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. All afternoon and evening, Ariadne's thoughts circled around the stranger with the brave eyes. She learned from whispers among the servants that he was named Theseus, a prince from Athens who had volunteered himself as one of the 7 young men, taking the place of someone who otherwise would have been chosen. The realization astonished her, a prince offering himself up for slaughter in the labyrinth. It was an act of selflessness and courage beyond anything she had witnessed in her father's court, where intrigue and self-preservation were the norm. They said Theseus had insisted he would slay the Minotaur and end this horror once and for all. Some dismissed his claim as the folly of youth or a boast made in desperation, but others dared to hope that maybe the gods had finally sent a hero to deliver Crete and Athens from this dark ritual. As the sun sank and twilight spread its gentle veil over the palace, Ariadne knew in her heart that she could not simply stand by when dawn came. She could not watch this noble prince march into the labyrinth's jaws of death as so many before him had, without doing something to help. The very thought of his bright life being extinguished in those cold, winding tunnels filled her with anguish. She realized with a clarity that surprised her that she cared for his fate more deeply than she could have imagined after so brief an encounter. It was as if some invisible thread had stitched itself between her heart and his in that instant when their eyes met. Perhaps it was the work of the gods. Maybe Aphrodite, the goddess of love, had sparked an undying flame in her soul at first sight of this brave youth. Or perhaps it was simply the meeting of 2 kindred spirits, recognizing each other in a world of cruelty. Whatever the cause, Ariadne felt a stirring in her being that she had never felt before, a mixture of compassion, admiration, and a tender warmth akin to love. And so, under the silent stars, Ariadne made her decision. She would defy the fate that cruelly awaited Theseus. She would help him survive the labyrinth and the Minotaur, even if it meant betraying her father's commands and risking her own life. In her mind's eye, she could see the moment at first light when the tributes would be led to the labyrinth's gate. She pictured Theseus stepping forward boldly, disappearing into the darkness beyond that bronze door. If he were truly to have a chance, he would need more than just courage. He would need a way to navigate that endless maze, something no one before had managed to do. And he would need a weapon, for the guards would surely not allow him to carry a sword into the labyrinth, intending him to be defenseless against the beast. Ariadne pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath as she considered what must be done. The plan formed in her mind like a dawn breaking over the Aegean Sea, simple yet daring. First, a way to mark the path out of the labyrinth, a trail he could follow back to safety after defeating the Minotaur. She recalled the old stories of heroes escaping monstrous lairs by unwinding threads or scattering handfuls of seeds. A thread, yes, a ball of strong thread, could be unwound behind Theseus as he moved through the maze, ensuring that once the deed was done, he could trace his steps out again. And who in all the world had more beautiful thread than the looms of Crete? Ariadne herself had baskets of fine yarn in her chambers, dyed in vivid colors for embroidery and weaving. She would give him one of those, perhaps the sturdy red wool that was meant for a new tapestry. It was thick and strong, yet would fit easily in his hand. Next, a weapon. Theseus, as a prisoner, had been stripped of any arms upon arrival. But Ariadne knew where the guards stored the prisoner's belongings and simple bronze swords. If she was clever and quiet, she could obtain a sword and hide it for him at the entrance of the labyrinth. Or perhaps she could persuade the master craftsman Daedalus, who still lived under her father's patronage in the workshops nearby, to aid her cause. It was Daedalus, after all, who knew the labyrinth best, and who might secretly wish to see his deadly creation defied. In fact, Ariadne remembered that Daedalus had once confided to her that every maze has a secret of its own, a pattern or a guiding clue. Perhaps he had always harbored guilt for the lives lost in the trap he built, and would be willing to help her now. Standing there on the balcony with the moon rising higher, Ariadne felt both fear and resolve swirling inside her. The breeze picked up slightly, brushing a loose strand of her dark hair against her cheek, as though nudging her to action. She took a final look at the night sky. "Great goddess Athena, wise protector of heroes," she whispered into the darkness, "and kind Aphrodite, who watches over lovers, be with me in what I am about to do." Her voice was nearly inaudible, but speaking those words gave her strength. In the distance, the sea's gentle murmur seemed to answer, encouraging her. With one last glance toward the faint outline of the labyrinth's mound, visible beyond the olive groves, Ariadne turned and slipped back into her bedchamber. The room was dim. Only a single oil lamp flickered on a low table, casting dancing shadows on walls decorated with murals of dancing figures and leaping dolphins. Carefully, Ariadne opened an ornate wooden chest at the foot of her bed. Inside lay spools of precious thread and yarn, glinting in colors even in the low light. She lifted out a large ball of deep crimson wool, a rich red thread whose color reminded her of the roses that climbed the palace pillars. It was strong. She tugged it firmly to be sure, and it did not break. Winding part of it around her slender fingers, she nodded to herself. Yes, this thread would be their lifeline out of the darkness. Next, Ariadne quietly stepped into her sandals and drew a light cloak around her shoulders. The palace corridors would be mostly empty at this late hour, but she had to move cautiously Her heart pounded in her ears as she crept through the halls, the cool marble floor smooth beneath her feet. In the stillness, even the soft rustle of her cloak and the whisper of her steps sounded loud to her anxious mind. At each junction, she paused to listen. An owl hooted somewhere outside, and the cicadas sang their nighttime lullaby in the gardens. But within the palace, only silence reigned, broken occasionally by the distant footfall of a sentry on his rounds. Ariadne made her way to a storeroom near the guards' quarters, where she knew weapons were kept. The door was slightly ajar, and inside she could see the gleam of bronze shields mounted on the walls and spears stacked in a barrel. Luck was with her. No guard was present inside at that moment. Perhaps out in the courtyard or dozing at his post. Slipping in, she quickly scanned for a sword that she could carry without drawing notice. On a wooden table lay several short swords, taken from the Athenian ship's crew and the tributes. Among them, she spotted a particular blade that seemed well crafted, yet plain. A double-edged sword, not too large, with a simple leather-wrapped hilt. She recalled seeing that very sword earlier in the day when the tributes were brought in. It must belong to Theseus. Perhaps he had carried it openly until he surrendered it to Minos's men. It felt fitting that he should wield his own weapon in the fight to come. Gently, Ariadne lifted the sword. Its bronze blade shimmered in the dim light of a single hanging lantern. For a moment, she feared its sheen would catch someone's eye, so she wrapped it quickly in a piece of cloth and held it close under her cloak. Her heart thumped wildly, and a part of her marveled at her own daring. Only that morning, she would never have imagined herself stealing through shadows, conspiring against her father's decree. But the face of Theseus flashed in her mind, and she steeled herself. Some causes were worth any risk. Thread and sword secured, Ariadne hurried on silent feet toward the one place she was certain she could find Daedalus at this hour, the small courtyard adjacent to his workshop. The old inventor often worked late into the night, engrossed in crafting wondrous toys or studying the stars as they wheeled overhead. He was a kind man, if somewhat eccentric, and Ariadne knew he had no love for the bloody purpose his labyrinth served. If anyone could advise her further or keep watch as she aided Theseus, it would be Daedalus. As she neared the workshop's archway, she noticed a soft, golden glow spilling out onto the pathway. Indeed, Daedalus was awake. Ariadne stepped into the courtyard where a grapevine climbed a trellis, its leaves casting dancing shadows in the lamplight. There she found the gray-haired craftsman sitting on a bench, carefully carving a small wooden figurine. A bronze lamp hung from a hook above him, illuminating his gentle, time-worn face. At the sound of Ariadne's footsteps, Daedalus looked up, his eyes keen despite his age. "Princess Ariadne?" he said quietly, surprise and concern in his tone. What brings you here at this hour, child? Ariadne swiftly raised a finger to her lips, silently pleading for discretion. She approached and in a hushed voice explained her plan. She spoke of the brave Athenian youth, Theseus, and how she intended to help him survive. Her words tumbled out softly but urgently, and as she spoke, Daedalus's brows rose in astonishment, then softened with understanding. The old man listened without interruption, only nodding now and then. When she showed him the ball of crimson thread in her hand, a slow smile crossed his face, as if he were pleased that she had thought of such a clever solution. And when she revealed the wrapped sword tucked under her cloak, he gently patted her shoulder, the way a grandfather might encourage a grandchild attempting a brave deed. "My dear, you have a courageous heart," Daedalus whispered kindly. "I have long regretted the dark fate tied to my creation. If you are decided on this course, I will do all I can to help you." He quickly led her into the workshop so they could converse safe from any prying eyes. There, amid half-finished inventions and tools glinted on the walls, Daedalus revealed to Ariadne the secret of traversing the labyrinth. "Always keep to the broadest path and mark each turn," he advised, confirming what she had already planned with the thread. The labyrinth was built with one continuous route that winds to the center. There are no true forks if one knows how to follow the wall. But in darkness and fear, one can become disoriented. Your thread will be his guide back. Have him tie it at the entrance door and unspool it as he goes inwards. It will never fail him if he keeps it taut. Ariadne nodded, absorbing his every word, gratitude shining in her eyes. Daedalus paused, then added with a note of sorrow, "I wish I could do more. I wish I could lead him myself, or dismantle the cursed maze stone by stone. But this, at least, I can do. I shall distract the guards at the labyrinth entrance when the time comes, to ensure he can secure the thread unnoticed. And I will pray to Athena for his victory." Ariadne gave the old man's hands a squeeze of thanks. No more needed to be said. They both understood the risks and the necessity of secrecy. The night deepened as Ariadne left Daedalus and made her way back to her chambers to wait for the appointed hour. Everything was prepared now. The thread, the sword, the plan. Still, her heart would not be calm. She spent the remainder of those moonlit hours, restless and wakeful, perched at her window or pacing softly across the mosaic floor, depicting the labyrinth symbol that ironically decorated her room's center. Each time she caught sight of that symbol, a curling pattern of black and red tiles, she felt a shiver of prophecy, as though her life and Theseus's were now entwined in that maze's pattern. At one point, Ariadne knelt by her window, gazing out at the dark shape of the labyrinth's entrance in the distance, and allowed her eyelids to close briefly. She whispered a fervent prayer to any gods who might be listening in the stillness, to Zeus, ruler of fate, to Athena, for wisdom and bravery for Theseus, and to gentle Artemis, that the morning might come softly and not betray their daring with ill fortune. In response, the night offered only the soothing chorus of crickets and the distant hush of waves brushing the Cretan shore. Yet these sounds comforted her, as if nature itself were singing a quiet lullaby of reassurance. Eventually, the eastern sky began to shift from black to the deep blue of pre-dawn. The stars were fading one by one, like candles blown out after a long vigil. Ariadne knew the time was drawing near. She wrapped the ball of thread and the sword carefully together in a parcel of cloth and slipped from her room once more. Her limbs felt light and tense at the same time, as if she were walking in a dream. All around, the palace still slept, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. The first bird of morning began to chirp a tentative note. Ariadne hurried to the appointed meeting spot, a small side entrance of the palace that led out to the grounds near the Labyrinth. There, behind a grove of oleander bushes, Theseus was supposed to be brought with the others shortly. She had arranged with Daedalus that he would guide Theseus subtly to that side of the group. And indeed, as the first golden blush of dawn touched the horizon, the quiet jangle of chains and murmurs of guards signaled that the prisoners were being escorted to their doom. Keeping herself concealed in the shadow of a column, Ariadne watched as the procession approached the labyrinth's door. The 7 young men and 7 maidens walked with hesitant steps, their wrists tied loosely with rope. Some were weeping softly. Others stared straight ahead in numb terror. Theseus walked near the front. In the early morning light, his figure looked even more princely than Ariadne remembered, head unbowed, shoulders squared, offering gentle nods or whispers of comfort to the frightened companions beside him. He wore a simple tunic belted at the waist, his feet bare on the dewy grass, but he carried himself like a hero from the old stories, every inch a son of kings, or maybe even a son of the gods. Ariadne felt her heart swell at the sight of him alive and well in this new day, and at the same time, a pang of fear clutched her. This could be the last time she saw him if fortune failed them. 2 armored guards marched the group to the heavy bronze door of the labyrinth. Daedalus was already there, dressed in his official robes as the master of the works, pretending to inspect the door's mechanism. He caught Ariadne's eye for the briefest moment and gave a slight tilt of his head. Everything was ready. Ariadne stepped forward from her hiding place, and with as much composure as she could muster, she addressed the guards. "I will take charge of the prisoners now," she announced softly, "by the king's order." The guards were startled to see the princess at such an hour, but they dared not question King Minos's daughter, believing perhaps that she merely wanted to oversee the sacrifice one last time. They handed over the rope that bound the youths together and stepped back to respectfully observe from a short distance. Now, Ariadne found herself face to face with Theseus. Around them, the labyrinth entrance yawned like a silent, dark maw in the earth. its doorway tall and arched, set into a hillside of stone. The other Athenians huddled behind, some too lost in despair to notice the interplay between the princess and the prince. But Theseus noticed. He looked upon Ariadne with a mixture of surprise and wonder. To him, she must have appeared as a savior out of legend, stepping forward with dawn's first light, a gentle maiden where he expected only pitiless wardens. For a heartbeat, the two youths simply gazed at one another. Ariadne could see the soft morning light reflected in Theseus's eyes, and the slight parting of his lips, as if he were about to speak her name. She wished she could freeze time in that instant to truly drink in the sight of him, but urgency spurred her on. With a quiet, reassuring smile, she pressed her bundle into Theseus's bound hands. She leaned close to him, as if giving a final farewell embrace to a condemned soul. This did not rouse suspicion, since it was not unheard of for a noblewoman to offer a token of pity. In doing so, she could whisper to him without others hearing. "This is a sword and a ball of thread," she murmured, voice barely above a breath, her lips near his ear as if in a parting kiss. "Tie one end of the thread to the doorpost at the entrance, and take the sword with you in secret. Unwind the thread behind you as you go. When you have defeated the beast, follow the thread back out. I will be waiting. You must trust me." As she spoke, she kept her face composed and almost tender, to onlookers appearing to be offering some comfort or prayer to this young man. Theseus's eyes widened slightly at her words, but almost immediately filled with gratitude and a fierce hope. He gave the smallest nod of understanding. His voice, no more than a breath in return, brushed her ear. "I will return to you, Ariadne. I promise." The way he said her name felt like a caress, filled with respect, wonder, and a gentle warmth. Hearing it made her heart flutter, like a captive bird yearning to soar. She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze again. In that moment, Theseus managed the hint of a grateful smile, a brave light in his eyes that kindled her courage further. She realized he was not afraid, at least not of the fight ahead. Perhaps he only feared for her safety in helping him, but he was too noble to protest her risk now. Ariadne stepped aside then, as it was time. She handed the rope that loosely bound Theseus and his compatriots back to Daedalus, who took it with a solemn nod, thus taking over the duty of leading them in. The guards looked on, somewhat perplexed by the gentle manner of this send-off, but they remained dutifully quiet. In his hand, hidden beneath the cloth of the bundle, Theseus had already gripped the sword and thread. Ariadne saw him flex his arms subtly, snapping the flimsy ceremonial bonds around his wrists as though they were made of reeds. He was free to fight now. Daedalus moved to unlock the heavy door. He pulled a lever, and with a low groan of stone, and metal, the bronze door swung open. A cold breath of air wafted out from the darkness inside, smelling of damp earth and ancient dust. The other Athenian youths recoiled slightly at the blackness before them. Some sobbed harder, clinging to one another. Theseus stepped forward to be the first to enter, gently urging others behind him to follow and stay close until they had to part. Before he stepped over the threshold, he turned one last time towards Ariadne. The rising sun behind him haloed his figure in golden light. Their eyes met across the distance. No words were spoken now, but in that single glance, an unspoken vow passed between them. Ariadne's fingers tightly intertwined as she held them to her chest, silently imploring every benevolent power to guide him. Then Theseus was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the labyrinth's mouth. One by one, the other tributes followed, ushered gently by Daedalus, who carried a torch to light the first steps. Ariadne caught a glimpse of the bright red thread glinting as Theseus fastened one end securely around a notch in the door frame. He did so swiftly, using the confusion of the moment to conceal the action. The thread paid out smoothly behind him, trailing like a thin lifeline of hope between him and the world outside. In a few heartbeats more, all the youths had entered, and the last to pass through was Daedalus, who cast a final encouraging look at Ariadne before he, too, went inside, handing the torch off to Theseus in a pretense of giving them light for a time. With that, the great door thudded shut behind them, sealing the labyrinth once more. Ariadne was left standing outside, the sun now cresting the horizon and spilling soft light over the dew-laden grass. The guards, believing all was proceeding normally, locked the door and resumed their positions some distance away. They took little notice of the princess now. Their duty was simply to ensure none of the condemned escaped once within. According to custom, they would wait by the door until either the awful sounds of the Minotaur's roar and victims' screams echoed up, signaling the grisly conclusion, or until enough time had passed that none could possibly be alive. Ariadne suppressed a shudder, thinking of those prior occasions. But this time, she dared to hope it would be different. This time, there would be no screams of terror, only perhaps the silence of a monster vanquished and the quiet footfalls of a hero returning. She backed away slowly, choosing a spot beneath a nearby cypress tree from which she could keep vigil without drawing the suspicion of the guards. The morning was still young, the sky a tender shade of pink and gold. A chorus of birds had begun to sing in the gardens, oblivious to the life and death struggle commencing beneath the earth. Ariadne pressed her hands together tightly and fixed her gaze on the sealed bronze door of the labyrinth. Though it was solid and immovable to the eye, she liked to imagine she could almost see that crimson thread stirring behind it. Unspooling with each step, Theseus took deeper into the twisting halls. How her heart yearned to pull that door open and run in after him, to stand by his side in battle, or at least to be closer to his peril and share in it. But she knew she must remain where she was, faithful and patient. Instead, she closed her eyes and conjured his image in her mind, Theseus with torch in one hand and sword in the other, thread tied at his waist, venturing boldly into the darkness. She envisioned the labyrinth as she remembered from Daedalus's designs, a single spiraling path like the shell of a snail, winding inexorably to a central chamber. If Theseus followed Daedalus's instructions, he would make each turn correctly, and the thread would guide him true. Time seemed to slow to a trickle as Ariadne waited in the gentle dawn. Each passing moment was filled with a tense stillness. She attuned her ears to the slightest sound. Occasionally, the faintest shuffle or echo would emanate from behind the door, a distant footstep, or perhaps the drip of water seeping through the stones, but nothing distinct. She imagined Theseus moving cautiously, leading the frightened youths behind him until a certain point where he likely told them to remain, while he pressed on to face the beast alone. Perhaps some of the youths might have tried to dissuade him or follow, but ultimately it was Theseus who must confront the Minotaur, and he would not want them in harm's way when chaos ensued. The sun climbed a little higher, its rays beginning to chase away the morning mist clinging to the ground. Ariadne's fingers absent-mindedly twisted together as she thought of the thread connecting her to Theseus. In her mind, that slender red cord became a symbol of their fates intertwined. If he succeeded, it would be the thread of life, pulling him back to her. If he failed, she refused to complete that thought, banishing it like a dark cloud from a clear sky. Instead, she focused on calm, positive images. Theseus emerging triumphant, the nightmare ended, and the warm, safe embrace she would offer him when he returned into the light. Within the labyrinth, unknown to Ariadne, Theseus advanced steadily. The world around him would have been one of utter darkness beyond the small circle of light cast by the torch Daedalus had given him. The air would be cool and thick, with the scent of moss and ancient stone. The floor was uneven underfoot, strewn with dust and the bones of unfortunate victims from the past, though likely Ariadne had never been told of those grim remnants, and even if she had, she did not let herself imagine them now. Instead, she saw in her mind the hero's journey. Each twist of the passage he navigated by unrolling the crimson thread and feeling along the wall as Daedalus instructed. His breath quiet and steady, his senses heightened. Perhaps he whispered gentle reassurances to the other Athenians he had left at a safer corner, telling them to hold the thread taut and wait for his return. She could almost hear his kind voice echoing softly in those stone halls, instilling hope where there had been despair. As Theseus ventured farther, the labyrinth would lead him inevitably towards the heart of the maze where the Minotaur dwelt. Ariadne had often pictured that creature in her nightmares. A towering figure with the hulking body of a man and the fierce head of a bull, its eyes burning with mindless rage. Many times she had heard it bellow in the night, a sound like a furious bull mixed with a man's anguish, and it had chilled her blood. This morning, however, she prayed the beast might still be slumbering when Theseus found it, so that a quick, merciful strike could end its life before it fully awoke to its fury. She shivered, recalling how in some tales her half-brother, the Minotaur, was said to devour his victims. But again, she chased that horrifying image away. If any man could best that monster, it was the valiant soul she had just sent forth with sword in hand. Suddenly, Ariadne's vigil was interrupted by a faint sound from behind the labyrinth's door, a noise different from the rest, one that sent a jolt through her. It was a distant, muffled roar, resonating up through the stone, like the rumble of thunder from underground. The guards around the entrance stiffened, exchanging uneasy glances. They recognized that sound. The Minotaur had awakened, and the confrontation had begun. One guard reflexively stepped closer to the door, as though to ensure it held firm. Ariadne clenched her fists, her nails pressing into her palms. The roar came again, louder this time, edged with what might have been pain or anger. She could not tell. It echoed, then faded, and was followed by a new sound that made Ariadne's heart leap, a faint, echoing cry that might have been a human shout, ringing out in determination. Though distorted by the heavy door, she believed she recognized the timbre. It had to be Theseus, letting out a battle cry as he charged the beast. The morning air fell silent after that shout. Birds startled at the noise had gone quiet. Even the insects seemed to pause their chorus. It felt as if all of nature was holding its breath along with Ariadne. Her entire being was focused on the labyrinth. In her mind, she pictured the scene unfolding in that central chamber. Theseus coming face to face with the Minotaur in the flickering torchlight, the monster pawing the ground like an enraged bull, its horns lowering to charge. Perhaps the beast bellowed once more and lunged, but Theseus, quick and lithe, would sidestep the rush, much as a skilled bull leaper would in the arena games. He might strike with his sword as the creature passed, grazing its flank. The Minotaur, wounded and infuriated, would wheel around for another attack. But Theseus had bravery and wit, honed from countless adventures on his journey to Crete. He would not be intimidated. With each clash, dust would swirl, and stones would clatter underfoot. In the darkness, only the slashes of the sword and the flare of the torch would reveal glimpses of the struggle. A flash of bronze blade, a glimpse of a horned shadow on the wall, the hero's face set in calm concentration, and the monster's eyes burning like coals. Ariadne's heart hammered in her chest as she waited, every second dragging out like an eternity. The guards shifted uneasily, but remained at their posts. They too anticipated some outcome soon, though they expected a grim one. One of them murmured to the other, "It sounds fiercer than usual." But Ariadne did not inquire what he meant. She dared not move or speak, all her senses strained toward that sealed door. Then, after what felt like an age, but was only minutes, a deep silence settled once more. The roars had ceased. No screams of dying youths had arisen. No noise at all now came from within the labyrinth's depths. The guard captain frowned and stepped closer to the door, pressing an ear to the cold bronze. Ariadne felt the world spin. Was this silence victory or tragedy? Had Theseus prevailed, or had he and the others been struck down into a voiceless end? She closed her eyes briefly, tears gathering at the corners. "Please, please," she whispered, barely forming the words, not even sure to whom she prayed now, perhaps to her own heart. In that moment, a gentle breeze picked up, stirring the leaves of the cypress above her. The morning sun had fully risen now, and its light felt warm on her shoulders, as though offering comfort. She remembered an old proverb one of her nurses used to say, "Dawn brings truth." The dawn was here. Soon, one way or another, she would know. Inside the labyrinth, unknown to those outside, Theseus stood panting in the gloom, the great beast lying slain at his feet. The Minotaur's final roar had died in its throat as Theseus's blade found its mark in the creature's heart. Now, bloodied and exhausted, but elated with triumph, Theseus found himself in an eerie silence, broken only by his own breaths and the distant sobs of the waiting youths who still huddled in the outer corridors. The torch had been dropped in the fight and extinguished, leaving him in almost total dark. But behind him, faintly luminous in a shaft of light filtering from some high crack, the crimson thread glowed like a trail of hope. He knew he must not tarry. With a resolute calm, Theseus took hold of the thread once more, grateful beyond measure for the foresight of the maiden who had given it to him. Carefully, he retraced his steps, winding the lifeline back around his arm as he went. He collected the other Athenians, relieved them with the news that the Minotaur was no more, and guided them along the path back out. Outside, Ariadne opened her eyes and stepped forward impulsively towards the door. She could not bear the suspense any longer. Perhaps against protocol, she approached the guards. They looked at her uncertainly. "Princess, you should stay back," one began, but she lifted a hand imperiously, surprising herself with the authority ringing in her soft voice. "Unbar the door," she said. "Now." They hesitated, as it was irregular to open the door so soon, but the mixture of her command and their own curiosity overcame them. The guard captain slid open the viewing grate of the door, peering in. Usually, at this point, he might have expected to hear the beast moving about, or see darkness still. What met his eyes made him reel back in shock. The flicker of a torch approaching from down the corridor, and figures, human figures, moving. "By the gods, someone comes," he exclaimed. Ariadne's heart soared. She rushed to the door beside the guards, peeking through the grate. Yes, there, in the gloom, she saw a warm glow and the unmistakable form of Theseus at the head of the line, his arm supporting another trembling youth, and behind them, others following, stepping carefully but quickly. Joy and overwhelming relief flooded her, and she had to stifle the urge to cry out. "Open it," she urged again, this time her voice trembling with emotion. The guards, perhaps still in disbelief, fumbled to lift the bar and undo the heavy locks. With a loud groan, the bronze door inched open, spilling torchlight and the smell of the labyrinth out into the fresh morning air. And then, like a miracle emerging from the underworld, Theseus stepped out into the light of day, alive and victorious. His once white tunic was stained with dust and streaks of dark blood. In one hand, he held the torch. In the other, the red thread, now almost fully wound around his arm. The bronze sword was tucked at his side, also smeared with evidence of his battle. Behind him, the other Athenian youths followed, eyes blinking in the brightness, their expressions shifting from despair into astonished joy as they realized they were safe beneath the open sky once more. They were weeping, laughing, and clutching at each other as though reborn. For a heartbeat, everyone stood still. Guards and servants who had gathered gasped, unsure whether to sound an alarm or a cheer. Theseus, breathing deeply of the free air, gently set down the torch on the ground and turned his gaze immediately to find Ariadne. She was already there before him. Unable to contain herself, Ariadne closed the distance between them and threw her arms around Theseus in a spontaneous embrace. In that moment, formalities and fears melted away. She felt the solid warmth of his body against hers and the strong beat of his heart, racing like a wild bird's, and yet steadying as she held him. He was alive. He was safe. A sob of relief escaped her lips, and she realized tears were streaming down her cheeks, though they were tears of happiness. Theseus gently released the sword from his hand and let it fall to the grass so he could return Ariadne's embrace properly. His arms encircled her, one still wrapped in loops of red thread that now bound them together in a literal sense. He pressed his forehead to hers for a brief moment, closing his eyes. "Ariadne," he whispered, his voice hoarse from exertion, but filled with gratitude and emotion. "We have done it." She pulled back slightly to look up into his face. Dust smudged his cheek, and a small cut above his brow trickled a line of blood. But to her, he had never looked more noble and beautiful. "You have done it," she corrected softly, a radiant smile breaking through her tears. "You slew the Minotaur." The very words felt surreal and triumphant on her tongue. Theseus smiled back, a gentle, tired smile. not without your help. Your wisdom and kindness saved us all. I could not have done it without your thread to lead me and your courage to inspire me." At this, Ariadne blushed softly, remembering that indeed she had played a part. Around them, the world began to stir as the shock wore off and reality set in. The other Athenians, now coming fully alive with joy, began laughing and embracing one another under the sun. Some fell to their knees, giving thanks to the gods. One of the youths even boldly shouted in exultation, a sound that rang across the courtyard. The guards, unsure of their standing now, eyed Theseus with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Their duty had been to ensure the sacrifice took place. Now that a new and unforeseen outcome had occurred, they likely feared King Minos' wrath for this breach of the natural order. One guard quietly observed the monstrous horned silhouette lying still within the labyrinth's shadowy entrance, and crossed himself in an ancient gesture of warding off evil. Another guard turned and hastened off towards the palace, presumably to inform the king of these unprecedented events. Ariadne and Theseus realized that there was no time to lose. They were bound together not just by the red thread, but now by fate. And in that fate, King Minos would surely loom as a threat. To Minos, the death of the Minotaur might be a relief on one hand, but Theseus' survival and the escape of the tributes would be a blow to his pride and authority. Ariadne had openly defied her father by facilitating this outcome, and Minos was not known for mercy. The only safety now lay in swift departure from Crete. Theseus gently brushed a strand of Ariadne's dark hair from her face and spoke urgently but softly. "We must leave, all of us, at once, before the king can act." Ariadne understood and nodded. She was ready. In truth, she had already prepared herself for this possibility when she first decided to help Theseus. In her heart, she had already chosen to abandon the only home she had ever known, to follow this man to the ends of the world if need be. The threads of their lives were now too tightly interwoven to part. "Follow me," Ariadne said, her voice steady. She took Theseus by the hand, the one still entwined with the red thread, and turned toward the path that led to the royal docks. The other Athenians gathered close behind, realizing this was their chance for complete freedom. Daedalus, who had emerged last from the labyrinth, gave Ariadne a quick, approving nod. He would not accompany them, being too old to flee and too entangled in Crete's affairs, but he silently blessed their escape with a wave of his hand. Ariadne glanced at him gratefully. The old man had risked much, and she hoped Minos' anger would not fall too harshly on him. Daedalus simply mouthed, "Go," and then faded back, cleverly interposing himself to stall the approach of any reinforcements by babbling excitedly about how Theseus managed the feat, giving precious moments to the fleeing party. With Ariadne leading, the band of youths ran lightly through the palace grounds, taking a side route known mainly to her, a shaded lane under pomegranate trees that would avoid the main courtyards and bring them near the warehouses by the docks. The morning air was fresh on their faces as they hurried, and Ariadne felt a wild exhilaration rising within her despite the danger. They were free, all of them free of the darkness that had hung over Crete. She was fleeing not as an exile in sorrow, but as a liberator, hand in hand with the hero she loved. They reached the docks where the Athenian black-sailed ship, which had brought the tributes, was moored under guard of only a few soldiers. Those guards had not yet heard of the astounding events at the Labyrinth. They were startled to see the group of youths rushing toward the ship, with Princess Ariadne and Theseus at the forefront. Before they could gather their wits or raise a cry, Theseus and a few of the older Athenian youths fell upon them with the swords seized from the palace stores. There was a brief scuffle. Ariadne averted her eyes from the violence as much as possible, focusing instead on urging the others onto the ship. The clash of bronze was short-lived in the brightening day. Theseus's prowess and the determination of the freed youth quickly subdued the surprised guards without any loss of life. Those guards who surrendered were bound and left on the pier, and those who resisted fiercely were disarmed and knocked unconscious. The path to the ship was clear. Working swiftly, Theseus and some of the more able youths raised the sails and loosened the mooring ropes, while Ariadne and the other maidens climbed aboard, lending assistance by fetching oars and coiling lines as best they could. Ariadne's heart pounded, not from fear now, but from the urgency of escape and the unfamiliar thrill of being on the cusp of a new journey. As the sail, a somber black, the traditional color of doom, which had not yet been changed, unfurled in the morning breeze, she cast one last glance back at the palace of her childhood. There upon the hill it stood, gleaming and beautiful in the sunlight, its columns and courts where she had lived all her days. She thought of her younger sister Phaedra, still safe in the women's quarters, likely still asleep and unaware, of her mother Pasiphae, and even of her father Minos, stern and unwavering. A wave of bittersweet emotion washed over Ariadne. She knew not when or if she would see them again. In that moment, a pang of grief for the life she was leaving behind mingled with the excitement of the life ahead. But she steeled herself. Each of us must follow the thread of our own destiny, she thought, and this was hers now, tugging her inexorably away to a new world. With a decisive heave, the ship was pushed away from the dock by the rowing of the strongest youths. The wind caught the sail, and slowly, then with gathering speed, the vessel glided out of the harbor. Shouts began to echo from the distance within the city, alarms being raised finally as news of the Minotaur's death and the prisoner's flight spread. But it was too late. The sea had accepted them into its vast embrace. Ariadne stood by Theseus at the stern of the ship, her slender hand still clasped in his as they watched Crete recede. The city of Naxos grew small, its its white buildings and green hills blurring in the haze of distance. She could just make out figures rushing to the water's edge, tiny and frantic, but none had fast enough boats ready to catch them now. The Athenian ship cut through the gentle waves, propelled by freedom's wind itself, or so it felt. Theseus turned to Ariadne. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, searching her face. She realized then that tears were on her cheeks again, but this time a gentle smile accompanied them. "I am," she answered, and found it to be true. Though she had turned her back on everything familiar, she felt an immense peace blooming in her chest. They were surrounded by the open sky and open sea, an expanse of possibilities where before there had been stone walls and locked doors. And beside her was Theseus, safe and victorious. All around them, the once doomed youths of Athens were now lively with excitement, tending to the ship or simply leaning on the rail, letting the sea breeze wash over them, laughing in pure relief. Already, some sang snatches of an old hymn to Apollo, thanking the gods for deliverance. In the exhilaration of the moment, one young man flung the black sail down, declaring that they should no longer sail under the color of mourning. He and a friend rummaged below deck and found a spare sail, a white one, and quickly set about hoisting it in place of the black, though in their haste they did not do so quite securely. The sail fluttered and billowed, shining bright in the sunlight like a beacon of hope. Ariadne watched this with a light heart, thinking how fitting it was to carry on the breeze the color of life, not death. Theseus, noticing the wobbly knots the enthusiastic youths had made, chuckled kindly and excused himself to go assist them before the sail came loose. Ariadne stood for a moment on the deck, now moving gently beneath her feet with the rocking of the sea, and closed her eyes to feel it fully. The salt spray on her face, the wind teasing her hair, the taste of freedom. When she opened her eyes again, the coastline of Crete was a pale line on the horizon behind. Ahead, the vast Aegean Sea stretched out, deep blue and sparkling, dotted here and there with the shapes of smaller islands in the distance. The morning sun climbed higher, promising a fair day for sailing. Before long, Theseus returned to her side, the sail now secure and drawing strong. A few of the youths who knew the art of navigation took charge at the helm and prow, setting a course northward, back toward Athens. But the journey to Athens would not be a straight one. There would be stops along the way for rest and provisions. For now, however, everyone was content to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Crete. As the hours passed, Ariadne and Theseus remained near each other, speaking softly whenever the duties of the ship did not require his attention. They shared the story of the Labyrinth from each of their perspectives, marveling at how perfectly their desperate hopes and plans had entwined. Ariadne listened with fascination as Theseus recounted the tense trek through the labyrinth's winding corridors, how he had tied the thread to the door and let it guide him, how the terrified youths had clung to him like frightened children as he promised them rescue, and then how he had gently left them in a safe alcove with the thread in their grasp and ventured alone towards the lair of the Minotaur. He described the final confrontation in measured tones, the initial shock of seeing the monstrous, half-shadowed figure in the flicker of his torch, how the creature's eyes glinted, and how its roar felt like a tangible force pressing against his chest. Ariadne shuddered slightly at this, unconsciously moving closer to Theseus as he spoke. He went on to tell of the fight, the enraged charges of the beast, the narrow dodges and parries he made, the moment he lost his torch and was plunged into darkness, lit only by the dull glow of distant fungi on the walls, and how he had to rely on his other senses. He spoke of remembering the sound of Ariadne's voice and the promise he made to her. That memory gave him strength in the darkest moment, when the Minotaur nearly cornered him against a wall. With a final surge of courage, he evaded the creature's horns and delivered a decisive strike with the sword she had given him, ending the Minotaur's life. As Theseus spoke, Ariadne felt every moment as if she were at his side in that terrible maze. When he finished, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and gently placed her hand over his, which still bore faint red marks from where the thread had been wrapped tightly. "The gods were with you," she said softly, "in your own courage and skill. How can I ever thank you for ridding my home of that terror?" Theseus shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "It is I who must thank you, Ariadne. I owe you my life, and more than that, those innocent souls owe you their lives too. Without your kindness and bravery, none of us would have left that labyrinth alive. Crete and Athens both are in your debt for ending the cruel tribute. I will never forget that it was your thread that led me out of darkness." He lifted their joined hands slightly, where a bit of that same thread still clung to his wrist. They shared a smile, one of profound understanding, and Ariadne felt a warm blush of happiness fill her chest. The day wore on pleasantly as the ship sailed across the sparkling waters. The initial adrenaline slowly gave way to a calm contentment among the crew of former captives. Some of the young Athenians, exhausted by the ordeal, dozed under the shade of the sails or in the shelter of coiled ropes, lulled by the gentle rocking of the ship and the rhythmic hush of the waves. Others sat in small groups, speaking in low tones about their plans now that they had a second chance at life. Soft laughter at times rang out, the laughter of people who had gone to the brink of death and returned, giddy with relief. It was a healing sound, blending with the call of distant seabirds that occasionally flew alongside their ship as curious companions. Ariadne herself felt fatigue finally catch up to her after the restless night and morning of intense emotions. As afternoon light glimmered on the sea, Theseus noticed her eyelids growing heavy even as she tried to remain alert, her dedication to staying by his side outweighing her tiredness. With gentle insistence, he led her to a shaded spot near the mast where some folded sails made a comfortable place to rest. "You should sleep," he urged softly. "You have been through so much. I will wake you if anything needs your attention." At first, Ariadne resisted. After all, she wanted to savor every moment of this newfound freedom with him. But as soon as she sat down against the rolled sailcloth, she realized how weary she truly was. Her limbs felt suddenly like lead, and a wave of drowsiness swept over her, aided by the soft lull of the sea. Theseus sat beside her, and with a fond smile, he removed his cloak, one given to him by a friend on board, since he had left Crete with nothing but the clothes on his back, and draped it around Ariadne's shoulders. It was warm from the sun and smelled of him, a comforting scent that reminded her of safety. "Rest now. You are safe here with me," Theseus whispered. Ariadne looked up at him gratefully. She allowed her head to lean gently against his shoulder as she curled up, wrapped in his cloak. Her eyes fluttered shut while the muted golden daylight danced on the inside of her eyelids. She felt Theseus's arm around her, holding her securely but tenderly, and the steady rise and fall of his breath. In that sweet, tranquil moment, with the soft crackle of the ship's timber and the hush of waves, Ariadne drifted into a light but peaceful sleep. As she slept, she dreamed softly. In her dream, she was walking through a garden at night, perhaps the gardens of Naxos, but changed. The hedges formed a maze, yet a silvery thread guided her path. The moon above was full and bright, painting everything in gentle light. Ahead of her, always just around the next turn, she caught glimpses of Theseus leading her onward, his figure bathed in moonbeams. She followed the thread unafraid, trailing her fingers along fragrant jasmine blossoms that grew on the hedge walls. The sound of the sea was in the distance, and the stars overhead seemed to form patterns that smiled down upon them. When she finally emerged at the garden's heart, she found Theseus by a still, clear pool. In the reflection of the water, she saw not her own face, but a night sky filled with constellations. Theseus reached out and placed a wreath upon her head, a crown of stars that glowed softly. "For you, Ariadne," he said in the dream, "for you will always shine." She touched the starry diadem and felt a sense of eternal peace. Ariadne woke as evening approached. The day had passed gently, and the sun was descending toward the west, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose. She found herself still resting against Theseus. He too had dozed off for a short while, and now he gazed out at the horizon deep in thought. The ship was gliding smoothly. The island of Naxos was looming ahead, beckoning them to find harbor for the night. This was the island of Naxos, known also as Dia, a fertile island with friendly shores where sailors often stopped for fresh water and supplies. Theseus noticed Ariadne stirring and smiled down at her. "Good evening, my dear Ariadne," he said softly. "We are approaching Naxos. We thought it wise to anchor for the night, as everyone is weary and the day wanes." Ariadne sat up and stretched, feeling the slight stiffness from sleeping sitting up, but otherwise much refreshed. She brushed back a lock of hair that had fallen over her face and returned Theseus's smile. "Naxos," she repeated, tasting the name. She had heard of it in passing, a place of vine-covered hills and ancient groves, sacred to Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry. The thought of setting foot on solid land again with Theseus at dusk felt appealing, a chance to rest properly and perhaps to gather fruit and water. The captain of the ship, a role assumed by the eldest of the Athenian youths, an experienced sailor, called out commands as they neared the gentle curve of a bay on Naxos' shore. The coastline of Naxos was picturesque in the twilight, soft sands shimmering with the reflection of the sunset, and beyond, gentle slopes rising green with olive trees and grapevines. A small group of dolphins even escorted their ship part of the way, leaping gracefully from the water as if playing in celebration of the day's events. Ariadne watched them with delight, their sleek forms weaving in and out of the waves. She took it as a favorable omen, a blessing from Poseidon perhaps, acknowledging their journey. As the ship approached the shallows, they furled the sails and carefully dropped anchor. Some of the stronger youths, including Theseus, jumped overboard into the waist-deep clear water and guided the ship to a good mooring spot near the sandy beach. Laughter rang out as a few who were less familiar with the water sputtered or slipped, emerging dripping and smiling. The sea was warm and inviting here. Ariadne stood at the railing, watching the scene with a heart full of gratitude. When it was her turn to disembark, Theseus insisted on carrying her to shore, to spare her from getting soaked, a gallant gesture that made the others grin and Ariadne laugh softly. He lifted her easily in his arms, and she looped her arms around his neck, trusting him. Stepping through the gentle surf, Theseus brought her to the dry sand and set her down carefully. "Welcome to Naxos," he said with a playful bow, as if he were merely a humble ferryman delivering a queen to her new realm. Ariadne curtsied in return, playing along, her eyes shining in the dusk. The group quickly set up a simple camp on the beach. They found a freshwater spring not far from the shore, where they refilled their jars. Some ventured a little way inland and returned with figs and wild berries found on the fringes of what seemed to be tended fields, perhaps left by farmers who wouldn't mind hungry travelers taking a little. Dry driftwood was gathered and a small fire was lit as the sky deepened from purple to indigo. Soon the stars began to twinkle into existence overhead, one by one. Ariadne found herself gazing upward as night fell fully, mesmerized by the sheer number and brilliance of the constellations away from the lights of any city. The band of the Milky Way arched across the sky like a gauzy veil. The events of the day felt almost like a dream now, as the calm of night wove its spell. On this tranquil Naxos beach, with the soft crackle of the campfire and the rhythmic hush of waves at the shore, it was as if the world had granted them a gentle sanctuary, a moment out of time to simply be. Sitting by the fire, the Athenians and Ariadne shared a modest meal of what provisions remained: some bread, the fresh fruit, and water. It was a feast to them, seasoned as it was with freedom and camaraderie. As the meal ended, a peaceful languor overtook the group. One by one, the youths began to nod off, curling up in cloaks on the sand under the open sky. Some continued to talk in low murmurings about home or plans, or giving thanks to the gods, but gradually quiet settled. Ariadne and Theseus remained awake, side by side, just at the edge of the firelight, where the lapping water nearly reached their toes. The moon rose, golden and nearly full, casting a long, shimmering path across the dark water. The two of them spoke in hushed tones of their hopes. Theseus talked of Athens and how he wished to show Ariadne his city, the olive groves of Attica, the temples and bustling markets, how everyone would celebrate her for her part in their liberation. Ariadne listened with a soft smile. She too spoke of what was on her heart, that she had left her old life behind without regret, save perhaps worry for her sister Phaedra, but that she felt she was walking the path of her true destiny now. I feel as though my thread of life has been woven into a new tapestry altogether, she mused quietly, one that I choose, not one chosen for me. Theseus gently took her hand and traced a small circle on her palm with his thumb. In that moment, under the vast sky, with only the night sounds around them, they felt entirely alone in a universe of their own. Theseus gazed into Ariadne's eyes, his own face illuminated softly by moonlight. "Ariadne," he said slowly, as if savoring her name, "you have given me more than I can ever repay. My heart," he paused, emotion catching his voice, "my heart is yours, if you will have it. When we reach Athens, I wish to make you my wife, my queen, so that we may rule with justice and love, and so that I may care for you all my days as you cared for me." The quiet sincerity of his proposal sent a thrill through Ariadne. Though she had dared to hope that he loved her, to hear it spoken aloud was like the sweetest music. Her eyes filled with joyful tears once again, and she whispered in return, "There is nothing I would want more, Theseus, than to be by your side always. My heart has been yours since the moment I saw you in my father's hall, brave and unbowed." He leaned in and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead, then her cheek, and finally, lightly, to her lips. It was a gentle, reverent kiss, like the brush of a feather, but it contained all the promises in the world. Ariadne felt as if she were melting and being reborn all at once. In that kiss was the dawn in the labyrinth, the sunlight on the sea, and every dream of the future entwined. When they parted slightly, both were smiling, and Ariadne let out a soft laugh of pure happiness. The sound was like a quiet bell in the night. Above them, unbeknownst to the couple, the stars of early spring glittered brighter, as if the heavens themselves rejoiced at this union of souls. Eventually, fatigue from the long journey and the emotional day began to weigh on them as well. Theseus stoked the fire just enough to keep it safely burning low and warm for the rest of the night, then settled back beside Ariadne on a soft patch of sand. He wrapped an arm around her, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady and reassuring beat of his heart. Thus, they drifted into a peaceful sleep beneath the open sky, closer than ever, wrapped in each other and the tranquility of the starlit night. But fate, ever unpredictable, had further designs for Ariadne, designs that would soon unfold upon this very isle of Naxos. For on this island, Ariadne had unknowingly entered a realm sacred to a powerful god, Dionysus, the wild and wondrous god of wine, revelry, and transformation, often roamed these wooded hills with his retinue of merry followers. And it was said by some that Dionysus had glimpsed Ariadne from afar, even as the ship neared Naxos, his divine eyes drawn to her shining spirit as she laughed with Theseus under the moon. Perhaps the god had fallen in love at first sight, or perhaps it was destined long ago that Ariadne's path and Dionysus's would cross. The ways of the gods are mysterious, often entangling mortal lives in their immortal stories. As Ariadne slept that night, she began to dream once more. But this dream was different from the gentle garden dream earlier. It started pleasantly. She dreamed of dancing barefoot on the beach under the moon, laughter on her lips, as Theseus played a lyre beautifully, though in waking life he was no great musician. But in dreams all things are possible. The stars above spun slowly as if they too danced. Ariadne felt joy in every step, dressed now in a flowing gown of silver gossamer that shimmered like starlight. Then, in the dream, the scene shifted subtly. She was still on the beach, but now she was alone, the waves whispering at her feet with strange urgency. The moon had set, and only starlight remained. From the dark line of the forest beyond the shore, she saw lights approaching, torchlights bobbing and weaving, accompanied by a distant, enchanting music of flutes and drums. It was a procession, drawing nearer, figures both human and not, laughing and calling out in strange exultation. As they stepped onto the beach, the leader became clear, a tall, handsome man, wreathed in ivy and grapevines, his eyes alight with something ancient and alluring. Around him pranced wild creatures, women with hair unbound, carrying thyrsus staffs, crowned with ivy, their voices ululating with joy, goat-footed satyrs, leaping and playing pipes, and big cats, leopards or panthers, padding alongside as tame as house cats. It was a revel of Dionysus. The man with the ivy crown stepped toward Ariadne, and in her dream she felt both curiosity and a tremble of awe. He held out his hand and spoke her name, Ariadne, in a voice that echoed like deep forest rivers and the hush of fermenting wine. Though part of her wanted to flee back to Theseus's arms, another part felt compelled to take that outstretched hand. When she did, a warmth and energy shot through her like sweet wine coursing in her veins. The dream grew hazy and frenzied. She was swept into a divine dance with the god and his companions under swirling stars, everything a blur of color, laughter, and the dizzying scent of grapes and honey. Ariadne startled awake with a soft cry. Dawn was just creeping into the sky, a pale gray light. The fire had died down to embers. Beside her, the sand was empty. Theseus was not there. For a moment, disoriented from the vivid dream, Ariadne sat up, her heart racing. She scanned the quiet beach. The other youths were still asleep or just beginning to stir. Theseus's cloak, which he had placed over her, was now sliding off her shoulders as she moved. He must have risen and draped it to keep her warm. She spotted footprints in the sand, leading toward the tree line. Perhaps he had gone to fetch water or answer nature's call. She smiled to herself. There was no cause for alarm. The dream's remnants still clung to her mind, but she shook them off and stood, wrapping the cloak around her as the early morning chill brushed her skin. The sky in the east warmed to pink and lavender, heralding the sun's imminent rise. Ariadne decided to walk a little, to shake off the strange feelings the dream had left. She moved along the water's edge, the cool surf washing over her feet, leaving ephemeral foam that traced patterns around her toes. In the calm of dawn, her thoughts turned to the future. Today they would continue onward to Delos perhaps, or directly to Athens if the wind held. She looked forward to seeing Athens, though a whisper of uncertainty also crept in. What reception would she, a Cretan princess, find there? But Theseus's love reassured her. With him, she would have a new home and family, she believed. Minutes passed. The sun's rim peeked over the horizon, sending a golden path across the water. Ariadne walked back toward the camp to see if Theseus had returned. As she approached the campsite, she noticed that many of the Athenians were up now and seemed agitated. They were milling about, looking perplexed. One of the young men saw her and hurried over, his face etched with worry. Ariadne's heart went cold when he spoke. "Princess, we cannot find Theseus. He is gone, and so is the ship." Ariadne felt as if the ground had opened beneath her. "Gone? The ship?" she repeated, not comprehending at first. She rushed past the lad to the cove where the ship had been anchored. There, she saw a terrible truth. The space in the bay was empty. The black-sailed Athenian ship was no longer there. Only gentle waves lapped innocently at the spot it had rested. She spun around, confusion and panic rising. The Athenians looked equally baffled, some calling out Theseus's name, toward the forest. One pointed. On the sand, near where the ship had been moored, lay a length of rope, cleanly cut, not simply untied or broken. It was as if the ship had deliberately set sail without some of its passengers. Ariadne's mind raced. Was this a misunderstanding? Maybe they had moved the ship to a safer anchorage on the other side of a spit. But as she scanned the horizon, dread flooded her veins. Far off, a dark speck against the morning glitter of the sea, a ship's sail catching the breeze, and not just any sail, a white square, the very sail they'd raised in place of the black. The Athenians saw it too, and a murmur went through them. It was moving steadily away from Naxos, already too distant to easily chase by swimming or any small craft. The realization of what it meant struck Ariadne like a physical blow. Theseus and some of the others were on that ship, and she was left behind. For an instant, her mind rebelled. No, it could not be. Theseus would never abandon her. They had pledged love under the stars just hours ago. There must be some reason, some mistake. Perhaps the ship had dragged anchor accidentally and drifted, or perhaps enemy pirates had seized it somehow in the pre-dawn and taken Theseus captive. Yes, some other force must be at work, because Theseus, her Theseus, would not willfully leave her on this shore alone. Clinging desperately to that hope, Ariadne called out, "Theseus." Her voice echoed off the rocky cliffs of the bay. She ran along the waterline a few steps, waving her arms, though she knew he was too far to see or hear. The other youths joined her shouting, though a few remained silent, exchanging uncertain glances with each other. One of the Athenian maidens gently approached Ariadne and touched her arm. I'm sure he'll come back for us," the girl offered, though her tone betrayed doubt. Ariadne felt her legs weaken. She sank slowly to her knees on the sand, waves licking around her shins, and stared out at the receding ship. Tears welled in her eyes, not yet fully spilling, as her mind tried to piece together an explanation. The dream of Dionysus flashed back to her, and she shivered. It seemed ominous now. Why would Theseus leave? Could it be that something had befallen him? Or, and her heart wrenched, had he changed his mind? No, she refused to believe his love was so fickle or false. Every fiber in her being told her his words last night were true. But something had intervened. Little did Ariadne know, on that ship now far at sea, Theseus stood on the deck with his face buried in his hands, anguish tearing at him. He had not wanted to depart Naxos without Ariadne. In fact, his soul was in torment for doing so. But in the deepest hours of the night, as he slept by Ariadne's side, a powerful presence had visited him in his dreams, a radiant figure of a goddess, perhaps Athena, or a messenger of Dionysus. Accounts differ. That presence had commanded him in no uncertain terms that Ariadne was not to continue with him to Athens, that the gods had chosen another fate for her. It warned of dire consequences should he disobey. Theseus's conscience warred with the divine order, but ultimately the reverence for gods and the mysterious compulsion of the dream had driven him to the excruciating decision. With silent tears, he had risen while Ariadne still slept soundly, kissed her one last time, and with several companions, unfortunately, including the one who was to steer, boarded the ship and set sail. In his grief and distraction, he even forgot to change the sail back to black as he originally planned to do after leaving Naxos, a forgetfulness that would later cost him dearly. But at this moment, all Theseus could think of was Ariadne, waking to find him gone, cursing his name. The thought cut him deeper than any wound, and far behind him, on Naxos' shore, his beloved indeed knelt in heartbreak. As the morning sun climbed, Ariadne remained by the water, motionless and numb with shock. The other Athenians respectfully gave her space, though one or two tried again gently to console or reason that maybe the ship would return. As time passed, however, that hope grew dimmer. Some of the youths suggested that they themselves might try to find a local fishing boat or something to leave the island, but Ariadne hardly heard them. Her world had come crashing down. She thought of her choices. She had saved him, loved him, left her home for him, and now he was gone. The word abandoned began to crystallize in her mind, bringing with it waves of hurt and disbelief. What had she done wrong? Did he not truly love her after all? Or was he taken from her by force or fear? Her heart clung stubbornly to the belief that there must be more to it, that the kind and valiant Theseus she knew could not betray her love so callously. The uncertainty gnawed at her, and with it, sorrow deeper than any she had known. The Athenians who remained eventually realized that they too were stranded for now. A few brave ones ventured inland to seek help or another boat, while others stayed to keep watch on the beach. They offered Ariadne food and drink, but she refused them all, her throat too tight with emotion to swallow. Under the rising sun, the island of Naxos bloomed into activity. Birds flitted between trees. The fragrance of wild thyme and sage drifted on the air, and distant goat bells tinkled from shepherds leading flocks to pasture. It was a place of beauty and peace, yet Ariadne felt none of its comfort in that moment. She felt only emptiness and the gathering storm of heartbreak. Finally, unable to hold back the tide of her emotions any longer, Ariadne rose and walked unsteadily down the beach, away from the others. She came to a solitary rock that jutted toward the sea, a place where the sand was dotted with white shells and tiny blue flowers that somehow grew even in the salty spray. There she sank down, pulling Theseus's cloak tighter around her shoulders. It was all she had left of him now. and she wept. The tears came slowly at first, rolling down her cheeks as silently as dew. Then more followed, until great sobs racked her body. She buried her face in her hands, her long hair tumbling around her like a veil, and let the pent-up despair pour out. In between sobs, she whispered his name, Theseus. Why? Over and over, like a broken prayer. The sea did not answer, except with its soft, relentless sighs. The sympathetic island winds gently lifted Ariadne's sobs and carried them through the grove and up the gentle slopes, perhaps even to ears unseen. For Naxos was not deserted. There were villages beyond, and more pertinently, the unseen presence of Dionysus and his retinue, who often roamed in hidden guise. It is told in certain myths that Dionysus himself either orchestrated Theseus's departure or simply seized the moment of it. Whichever the case, as midday arrived, Ariadne's crying eventually subsided into quiet exhaustion. She lay on the rock, cheeks wet and eyes red, gazing blankly at the wide expanse of blue before her. The sun was bright overhead, making the sea sparkle cheerfully, indifferent to her pain. It was then that she heard a new sound, very soft at first, a rustling in the nearby grapevine thickets, a few nervous chirps of birds taking flight, as if startled by someone's approach. Ariadne quickly brushed her tears away and sat up, alert but drained. Emerging from the tree line was a young woman, crowned with ivy leaves and carrying a staff twined with vines, a Maenad, though Ariadne did not immediately understand who or what she was. The woman had a compassionate look on her face, and behind her a few others, satyrs with pipes in hand and nymph-like maidens, hovered, watching. They did not seem threatening. In fact, they regarded Ariadne with a mixture of sorrow and admiration, as if they already knew her story. Then the group parted, and from behind them stepped a figure that caught the sunlight in a curious way. He wore a purple cloak and a wreath of ivy and roses on his dark curls. His eyes were a deep, warm brown, yet lit from within by a golden spark that was not mortal. He was youthful and godly all at once, with a grace in his step that spoke of both dancer and king. In his hand he bore a chalice brimming with red wine that sloshed slightly as he walked forward, leaving a trail of red droplets on the white sand like a scattering of rubies. Ariadne, sensing the presence of someone extraordinary, quickly stood, her sorrow momentarily overlaid by awe and a touch of fear. She realized with a start that this must be Dionysus himself, come out of myth into reality. Her heart, tender and broken, fluttered with apprehension. What could the god want with a forsaken maiden like her? Dionysus approached Ariadne slowly, respectfully. His retinue stayed a short distance back, as if to give them privacy. The god of wine beheld Ariadne with an expression of gentle pity and deep admiration. Indeed, it is said that he had fallen in love with her bravery and beauty the moment he saw her sleeping on the shore, and her present grief moved him profoundly. He spoke her name softly, Ariadne. His voice was melodious and soothing, like a song on the rim of a wine glass. Why do you cry alone on these sands with a heart so heavy? The very ocean seems to sigh in sympathy with your sorrow. Though he surely knew, he invited her to share her pain, to unburden herself. Ariadne, struck by the kindness in his tone, felt more tears gathering. It was as though the presence of this compassionate stranger, stranger though he was, his power was evident, unlocked the words she hadn't been able to say aloud. In halting, trembling speech, she told him of her love for Theseus, how she had saved him with her thread, how they fled Crete together with hopes and promises, and how she awoke to find herself abandoned. Each word poured from her as fresh heartache, and tears flowed anew down her face. She turned her face away, embarrassed perhaps to show such vulnerability to a god, but Dionysus reached out gently and took her hand, his touch warm and oddly comforting. "He has left me," she whispered, voice cracking. "I gave everything, and now I am nothing. To him, to my home, alone." The word alone lingered in the air. The god's followers behind him exchanged glances. One satyr shook his head sadly, and a nymph wiped a tear from her own eye. Dionysus let out a soft sigh. "Poor maid," he said tenderly, "you're not nothing. You're Ariadne, daughter of Minos, she who saved a ship full of innocence through love and wit. Any man or god should count himself fortunate to stand at your side." At these words, Ariadne looked up into Dionysus's eyes, searching them. She saw no guile there, only sincerity and a spark of deep emotion that surprised her. With gentle reverence, Dionysus continued, "Theseus, in his mortal frailty, or perhaps by fate's design, has failed to cherish the gift he was given. But know this, the fault is not in you. Sometimes the threads of destiny weave in ways we mortals, and even we gods, cannot immediately comprehend." He gave a slight smile. And sometimes a thread broken with one person can lead to an unexpected tapestry with another. At that, he placed his hand over his heart, as if to confess that she had moved his own heart greatly. Ariadne felt a strange warmth emanating from Dionysus. It wasn't the passionate, youthful fervor she'd felt with Theseus, but rather an enveloping compassion and admiration that soothed her battered spirit like a balm. Could it be possible that in the wake of losing one love, another could find her so swiftly? She was afraid to even consider it, lest it betray her feelings for Theseus, or be just a passing whim. Yet Dionysus was no ordinary suitor. He was a god, immortal and radiant, and he looked at her as if she were precious. She found herself drawn to his kindness. "I do not know what the gods intend for me," she murmured, voice steadier now. My hopes have been dashed. I feel adrift. Her eyes drifted to the horizon again, where the sail had vanished. If not for my friends here, I would think myself utterly forsaken. Dionysus gently tilted her chin with a fingertip, guiding her gaze back to him. You are not forsaken, Ariadne, he said softly. In fact, perhaps you were brought here under the care of something far greater. The stars themselves may have guided your path to Naxos. At this, he gestured upward, and Ariadne remembered the dream of the starry crown. A slight shiver went through her. Somehow she felt the stirrings of fate. The god of wine then did something unexpected. He knelt before her on the sand, as one would before a queen or goddess. Behind him, his followers let out small gasps of approval and delight. Dionysus, still holding Ariadne's hand, said, Lady Ariadne, I love you. I have loved you from the moment my eyes fell upon your form, sleeping under the moon, and even more now that I have witnessed the beauty and strength of your soul. I would be honored beyond measure if you would consent to be my bride. I would cherish you eternally, place a crown of stars upon your brow, and share with you all the joys and wonders of my realm. You would never know loneliness or sorrow again, for I would fill your days with laughter and music, and your nights with reverence and love. Ariadne stood speechless. The Athenians, some distance away, were now watching too, marveling at this divine courtship. To think that the great Dionysus proposed marriage to the princess, who moments ago thought her life in ruins. It was as if the cosmos had flipped a coin from despair to hope in a single turn. Yet Ariadne's heart hesitated. Could she accept this new love so quickly? Was her heart even whole enough to give? She felt the ache of Theseus's absence like a bruise, tender, but perhaps no longer bleeding, soothed by Dionysus's words. She recalled tales of Dionysus. Though known for wild revelry, he was also known for rewarding those he loved with great loyalty and miraculous gifts. Unlike capricious Zeus or wrathful Poseidon, Dionysus was a god of ecstasy and catharsis, often gentle to those who honored him. And here he was, promising her fidelity and happiness beyond mortal scope. Moreover, Ariadne felt something stirring inside her as she looked into Dionysus's expectant eyes, something like the sprouting of a bud after rain. It wasn't the same as what she felt for Theseus, but it was perhaps just as profound in a different manner. It was as if her soul recognized in Dionysus a kindred understanding of sorrow and joy, death and rebirth. After all, Dionysus himself knew loss, his mortal mother Semele, for one, and triumph, his ascent to Olympus. He was a deity well acquainted with the full spectrum of emotion. She realized then that her destiny might indeed lie along a divine thread rather than a mortal one. Theseus's chapter in her life might have been the bridge to bring her to this island at this dawn to meet Dionysus. With a tentative but growing smile, Ariadne nodded, tears of a different kind now gathering, tears of gratitude and relief. "My lord Dionysus," she said softly, "you honor me beyond words. I accept your offer if you truly wish to have a broken-hearted girl as your wife." At that, Dionysus rose swiftly, joy lighting up his face. "We shall mend that broken heart with love and immortal care," he assured. He took from one of his followers a circlet, a diadem gleaming with 9 precious gems, each shining like a star. It was his own wedding diadem, a gift forged by Hephaestus, perhaps, given to him for the occasion by Aphrodite. Some say it was a piece of the eternal heavens, placed in his hands by Zeus. He placed it gently upon Ariadne's brow. Immediately, a sense of calm and happiness washed over her, as though the crown itself carried a blessing. In that moment, the skies seemed to rejoice. The sun shone brighter, and the gentle breeze carried the sweet fragrance of blooming flowers from the meadows of Naxos. The assembled maenads and satyrs let out whoops of celebration and began to dance impromptu, circling around the couple with lively steps. Some played their flutes and pipes, a merry tune that harmonized with the crash of waves and sigh of wind. The Athenian youths, though startled by this rapid development, found smiles on their faces as well. They knew Ariadne deserved such happiness after what she endured, and what a tale it would be to tell back home that their savior had become the bride of a god. Dionysus led Ariadne by the hand toward the grove, and as they walked, vines laden with grapes and ivy sprouted from the earth wherever the god's feet touched, twining around the trees to create natural garlands. Nymphs appeared from the woods, bearing wreaths of flowers to crown the heads of the Athenians too, welcoming them to join the feast that was about to commence. For Dionysus declared that this day would be a day of celebration like none other. His wedding feast to Ariadne would be held right here on Naxos under the open sky. With the wave of his hand, he conjured tables laden with fruits, cheeses, breads, and of course, great pitchers of the finest wine. Tables and couches, bedecked in purple fabric, appeared in the clearing of the grove. Music sprang up from invisible lyres, adding to the melody of flutes and drums. Ariadne watched this wonder unfolding with a soft laugh of astonishment. She felt almost dizzy at the sudden reversal of fortune, but in a delightful way, as if she were tipsy on Dionysus's magical wine without even tasting it yet. The god beside her was attentive and considerate. He guided her to a carved wooden throne, adorned with leaves that had not been there minutes ago, clearly conjured for her comfort. There he sat with her, and servants, dryads perhaps, appeared to offer her sweet nectar and ambrosial foods that revived her strength fully and chased away any lingering sadness, like morning sun dispels mist. As she nibbled on a honey cake and sipped nectar, Dionysus raised his own golden goblet filled with wine. in a voice loud enough for all at the feast to hear yet still melodious, he toasted to Ariadne, my love, my queen. May her days of sorrow be forever behind her, and may her days of joy be eternal. The crowd, mortal and immortal alike, cheered heartily. Ariadne felt warmth flood her cheeks and heart. She could not recall ever feeling so cherished and embraced by goodwill. The wedding celebration unfolded in a dreamlike manner. Dancers twirled in celebratory frenzy, a controlled frenzy that was strangely hypnotic rather than chaotic. Dionysus himself took Ariadne for a dance. They moved with a natural grace, her white gown and his purple robes flowing together as they stepped over petals that had been strewn on the ground. His touch was respectful, yet conveyed a sense of deep longing that made her feel desired and secure all at once. She realized she was smiling freely, laughter returning to her voice as he spun her lightly and caught her in his arms. Time seemed to lose meaning during the festivities. It could have been hours, or it could have been only minutes. It felt like a blissful eternity where no pain could intrude. Ariadne even spotted, at the corner of the gathering, the old craftsman Daedalus, who must have been brought by Dionysus for the occasion, or wandered in as a guest of the island's deity. He waved at her, and she waved back, heartened to see a familiar face sharing in her happiness. As twilight fell upon the isle once again, the celebrations took on a more enchanted air. The stars emerged, and Dionysus made sure every cup was full and every guest content. The Athenians in particular would have marvelous stories to tell, how they supped with nymphs and satyrs and witnessed a mortal raised to godly marriage. Some say that those youths were even granted safe passage home with gifts from Dionysus's bounty when they chose to leave, but many tarried on Naxos a long while, reluctant to part with such wonder. Now, under the clear night sky, Dionysus stood with Ariadne at the highest point of the clearing, where one could see the ocean glinting with starlight. He removed her diadem from her head briefly and held it aloft. At that moment, Ariadne felt a surge of energy in the air, as Dionysus invoked his divine power. He gently tossed the diadem into the heavens, and to Ariadne's astonishment, it did not fall back down. The crown's jewels kindled, blazing with intense light, and they took their place among the stars, forming a new constellation, a delicate semicircle of brilliant points. There, Dionysus murmured, his arm around Ariadne's waist as they both looked up. The crown of Ariadne shall shine in the heavens forever, so that none may forget this blessed day. 7 stars to honor the 7 letters of your name, my love, glowing for all time. Some say 9 stars, but whichever the number, their luminance was breathtaking. Ariadne gasped softly. Tears of happiness blurred her vision of the sparkling crown placed in the sky. She felt truly immortalized, honored in a way no mortal woman could dream of. It was as if Dionysus had taken her broken thread of life and woven it into the very fabric of the universe. She turned to Dionysus and saw that he, too, was gazing at her, not the stars, with a tenderness and adoration that one might expect only in the gentlest of lovers. In that gaze, she found a love that was steadfast, reverent, and deeply passionate all at once. The wounds of her heart had been bound up with golden thread, and though scars of memory might remain, they were now a source of strength rather than pain. Under the newly formed Corona Borealis, Ariadne's crown, the god and his bride sealed their union with a loving kiss. The surrounding revelers grew silent in reverence, the music softening to a hush of harps. The night air held its breath, as though sanctifying the moment. When the kiss ended, Ariadne felt a new sensation blooming within her, a gentle ignition of divine spark. By joining Dionysus in some tales, she too was granted immortality, becoming a goddess in her own right. Whether she felt it that very night, or it came later when Dionysus took her with him to Olympus, in her soul she sensed a profound change, a serenity and empowerment, as though she was no longer merely at the mercy of fate, but a part of fate's grand design herself. In the days that followed, Ariadne learned to embrace her new life. She and Dionysus traveled the length and breadth of Naxos, and later journeyed beyond, even to the halls of Olympus, where the gods welcomed the once abandoned princess as one of their own. Her story became legend among mortals, a tale of heartbreak turned to joy, of a guiding thread, and of a love that transcended the bounds of mortal life. And Theseus? He reached Athens and faced his own tragedy, the loss of his father due to the sail mishap. So his joy was short-lived, and he had many years of kingship marked by both heroism and sorrow. Perhaps he thought of Ariadne from time to time with guilt and regret, not knowing fully whether it was the gods or his own folly that parted them. But Ariadne's destiny had carried her far beyond the mortal prince's reach, into the arms of a god. On clear nights, when the sky was dark and the air was still, sailors and lovers alike could look up and see Ariadne's crown twinkling among the stars, a gentle arc of lights that seemed to smile down on the world. People would tell each other that the crown was placed there as a symbol of true reward for faithfulness and goodness. For in Ariadne's story, though she suffered the depths of betrayal and loneliness, she emerged to find a love and happiness even more profound. Back on Naxos, the islanders instituted a yearly festival in Ariadne's honor. Some say in Dionysus's honor, but to her it was one and the same. They celebrated their divine couple. On those festival nights, the island would be alive with music, dance, and wine, reenacting the moment Dionysus found Ariadne and brought her joy. Young women of Naxos would dance wearing garlands that mimicked a crown of stars, and young men would play the role of Theseus fleeing and Dionysus arriving, to remind everyone that sometimes what you lose opens the door to what you will gain. As eons passed, Ariadne's name was spoken with affection, and her myth served as comfort to many who felt the sting of heartbreak. It taught them that patience and self-worth might one day be rewarded beyond imagination, that a thread of hope, however thin, could lead you through even the most winding paths. It taught that beyond each twist of the labyrinth of life, a new light may shine, and under even the cloudiest sky, the stars still quietly wait to reveal themselves. And so, on that quiet night, under a moonlit sky, with gentle waves kissing the shore of Naxos, Ariadne's story came to its poetic close. The princess who had given her heart to a hero and been left in despair found a new home among the stars, a loving husband in a god, and a crown that would shine forever. May this gentle story linger like a sweet dream in your mind. And whenever you find yourself in darkness, remember Ariadne's thread, that slender hope, that quiet love, which can guide you through even the most winding paths. Remember that beyond the labyrinth's twists, a new dawn can always break, and under the night's canopy, the stars still gleam with promise. Now the hour is late, dear listener, and the soft weight of sleep is pressing upon your eyes. Let the calm of the night surround you. Imagine the soothing sounds of the Aegean Sea, its waves whispering against the sand, repeating ancient secrets that only those who listen with their hearts can hear. Feel the tender night breeze like a caring hand, brushing across your face and ruffling your hair. Overhead, the heavens wheel slowly, Ariadne's crown twinkling among the constellations, watching over all who wander and all who love. Your breathing is slow and steady now, matching the rhythm of those gentle waves. With each breath out, release any lingering tension. With each breath in, invite serenity. You are safe here in this moment. As the story's end softly settles in the air, like the last note of a lullaby. In this peaceful state, perhaps you too can feel that invisible thread of comfort and hope winding through you, connecting you to the warmth of all the kind voices and loving presences you have ever known. It is your own Ariadne's thread, keeping you safe in the labyrinth of dreams, ready to guide you back to the light of morning when it comes. But for now, there is nothing more to do, nowhere else to be. You can let go, allowing yourself to drift, like a ship with its sails slack in a calm bay, rocking softly, so softly. The story has cast its gentle spell, and you can surrender to the quiet that follows. One by one, let your thoughts float away like petals on a stream. If any thought tries to stir you, just smile at it and let it pass, returning your focus to the dark, comforting canvas behind your closed eyes. Upon that canvas, if you like, you can picture Ariadne's radiant crown glimmering, each star a kindly eye watching over you, protecting your dreams. Night deepens. All around, the world slumbers. People, animals, even the flowers with their heads bowed under the dew. And you are a cherished part of this world, deserving of rest and renewal. Feel the weight of your body sinking into your bed, as if you were sinking into the embrace of soft sand, warm from the day, but now cooling pleasantly under the moon. There's a sense of being held, supported by the earth itself, just as Ariadne was held by Dionysus when she felt faint with relief and happiness. Your heartbeat is slow and calm. Each beat is like a distant drum from the Naxos celebration, a reassuring rhythm that lulls you deeper. Allow your mind to float now, perhaps replaying gentle scenes from the tale. See the flicker of the torch in the labyrinth and how bravely Theseus followed the thread. See Ariadne standing at the door, hope in her eyes. See the lovers sailing under the stars. See the rose-fingered dawn on Naxos' shore, the tearful girl on the sand, the compassionate god approaching with open arms. See the shining crown ascending to the sky. All ends in starlight, and that starlight now fills your own quiet mind, twinkling softly until your thoughts become like a night sky, vast, calm, and clear. Sleep is very near. Embrace it willingly. There is nothing to fear, for like Theseus, with the thread or Ariadne in Dionysus' arms, you are guided and you are loved. Let the final vestiges of wakefulness fade. You might notice the very subtle sound of your breath, or slight sensation in your toes or fingertips, but even those are gently dissolving into the sweetness of slumber. Tonight, you have journeyed far in your imagination, but now you have come home to rest. Feel a sense of gratitude for the rest you are about to receive and the comfort of your bed. This gratitude, however small, is a gentle light itself, glowing within you, ensuring your dreams are kind and your sleep is healing. Now take one more deep breath and release it slowly, very slowly, as if releasing the last worry, the last thought, the last bit of tension. Feel yourself drift, drifting into a dream. A hush falls. Stars watch over you as they watched over Ariadne. The soft night enfolds you like a loving whisper. Sleep, dear listener, and dream sweetly. May your dreams be filled with gentle guiding threads and starry crowns, and may you awake refreshed when morning comes, with a heart full of peace. For now, sleep, sleep. Good night.